Welcome everybody to this session for the SEERS conference that will be held April 17 to April 21 virtually. We have here Professor Elvevåg from Norway, and she will be talking about her very exciting symposium. And we have Daniel Hauke and Christine Schifani, both have received the prestigious Travel Award from SEERS. I am an assistant professor at Harvard University and at the VA in Boston. And I'm gonna ask Daniel, Christine, and Professor Elvevåg to introduce themselves briefly.
Hello, I'm Dr. Christine Schifani from the Center of Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto, Canada.
Hey, I'm Daniel Hauke. I'm from Basel University or University of Basel.
My name is Brita Elvevåg, and I am sitting here in the Arctic at the University of Tromsø, the Arctic University of Norway.
Fantastic. I also want to say that I am deputy chair of the education committee at SEERS, and so I'm here in that role. Now, so I would like the travel awardees to ask questions to Dr. Elvevåg about the symposium, and I would like to start with Daniel.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Could you tell us something about this very interesting topic of your symposium? Can computer algorithms detect emergent psychosis through analyzing language and behavior? What is it all about?
Well, thank you very much. So there have been some amazing developments in speech technologies in the last few decades, and gradually these have been applied to psychiatric research. And 2 decades ago, we started using natural language technologies with the idea that they could provide a second opinion to psychiatrists regarding the severity of illness. And we started using these tools to rate the speech that was generated by patients with schizophrenia, with the idea of measuring clinical thought disorder in an objective and reliable manner. And today, with the added bonus of millisecond precision that we can get from automatic speech recognition methods, we can add detailed temporal information into our models of how we understand something like disordered speech and incoherence in thought. And so these methods have provided a really rich framework with which to examine mechanistically how coherent speech is generated, and therefore also how incoherence in speech emerges. Voice, speech, language provide enormously rich data sets as they contain information about what people say, how they say it, and when they say it. So by leveraging the latest in speech technologies in psychiatric research, we've got this wonderful opportunity clinically to assess and monitor cognitive and mental states by automatically analyzing speech data streams. And this type of detailed examination of speech can be done both within the clinic or laboratory as well as outside of controlled settings. So it can be done remotely in patients' home settings. So a few years ago, we successfully developed and trialed a mobile app that remotely took patients through a series of repeatable verbal exercises, such as retelling a story that had been told, as well as more standard clinical type of questions, such as discussing emotional states. And so by leveraging machine learning and natural language processing, it was possible to analyze these sound bites for signs of mental and cognitive state, both by analyzing how they compared to an individual's previous response, as well as how it compared to the larger patient population. And we tested this out in a few hundred patients living either in northern Norway or rural Louisiana in the US. And so the study occurred within different languages, as well as different cultural and legal settings. Now, of course, the promise of this kind of work is that it will enable clinicians to monitor patients remotely, will alert them to issues or changes that arise between appointments that could be life-saving. But still, after all this time, there remains a massive gap between the success empirically or technically of being able to detect subtle differences or change and the actual real-world implementation of such systems to assist clinicians with a second opinion. So very, very much remains to be done.
Thank you. This is a wonderful question and wonderful response. Really, exciting topic. And Christine, I know you also have a question and you're very interested in this topic.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you so much first for answering this question. This was really interesting already. And I was wondering, you were also going to talk about challenges in the symposium with using this kind of research and techniques, especially with like the new apps and yeah, how to use machine learning in this way. Can you elaborate a little on that?
Definitely. Yeah, thank you for that question. So the reason that this symposium hopefully will be very exciting is that we're at this really important point where the field really feels like a bit like the Wild West, where it's a bit too easy to get, you know, small imperfect studies published. And so we've proven that we can do useful things with small data sets, but now we need to move beyond individual studies to the big picture of how this works on a larger scale. We need larger data sets, hardened methods to translate into the real world. And really, at this point, the excitement about potential psychiatric applications of these methods is really tempered, or it's moderated, reduced by the risk that decisions about clinical issues will be made for spurious reasons, that the models these methods rely on might not generalize to unseen data, and that biases inherent in the data sets might propagate into predictions with harmful results. So the promise of clinical translation is much more likely to be met if these data models are trustworthy. And what that means is they need to be explainable. The reason a prediction was generated should be clear. They need to be transparent. The implementation details and assumptions of the model need to be explicitly shared, and they need to be generalizable, which also means we cannot assume, as we've done so far, that everyone is the same, that there are these critical differences as a function of culture, education, socioeconomic status, gender, and so on. So we really need to have now clear guidelines so as to avoid generating conclusions that might not generalize and actually have adverse consequences when applied clinically. So the current state of the field is that the algorithms and models in psychiatric research are for the most really not ready to be translated into real clinical practice and programs of detecting risk of developing psychosis and monitoring treatment responsiveness.
Thank you for the exhaustive response, and it's a very honest response because algorithms basically determine the outcome of these types of studies. If I may, I have another question. Do you feel that there is predictive ability in language analysis, for example, in clinical high-risk populations?
Tremendous question. Yes, obviously that's why I'm so interested in this. And of course, there's enormous excitement about that potential. However, and my talk is in the symposium is going to be a little bit more reserved. Yes, there is enormous potential in terms of precise and sensitive measures, but despite the latest generation of these natural language processing methods being talked about as being very sensitive and very objective, so far they've been mostly examined in isolation and rarely in combination with other measures. But obviously when we make inferences about patient states, we use multiple channels of behavioral features, and we look at changes over time, so longitudinally, in order to capture subtle but critical changes. So in the same way that clinicians make critical decisions based upon many observations and many types of data, we're at this point where we also have to do that with machines. They need to leverage multiple channels and types of data. So it's an issue of multimodality, as well as considering the dynamic and temporal relationships between these channels. And in terms of predictability, which is what you just asked, there's these issues of specificity and temporality. So even though these measures might demonstrate sensitivity for detecting various clinical phenomena, specificity to specific conditions has rarely been demonstrated. But surely this is critical if we're going to talk about clinical translational value. And relatedly, it remains to be established what sort of temporal value this data has in terms of predicting when something will happen. Whether the identified pattern indicates that a clinically significant change is going to happen today, tomorrow, in a week, in a month, a year or even a decade. So just having precise and sensitive measures of change is arguably not especially useful unless it makes some sort of useful prediction about what is going to happen, so specificity, and when this is going to happen.
Fantastic response. And we are really looking forward to attend your symposium at the Schizophrenia International Research Society in April. We'll be excited and ask other questions. And I have to say very honest answers, because there are plus and minuses in this field. Daniel and Christine, do you have other questions for Professor Elvevåg?
I would actually be interested in knowing what types of clinical questions can be addressed with these models. So is it treatment, response prediction, transition prediction? What are you thinking of, and where do you see the sort of greatest potential clinically to use these models?
That's actually a really complicated question, which could have a very, very long answer. So I'm going to take a short attempt at that. My greatest excitement at the moment is actually to use these methods to automate the assessment pipeline. So in other words, be able to actually develop new types of testing methods so we can collect lots of different kinds of data and actually address the issues that you just raised. And I think for me, the most exciting thing right now with these methods is that they actually can inform us about redesigning the next generation assessments, the next generation neuropsychological tests, so that we don't just have these single snapshots in time, and we can move from cross-sectional testing to more continuous, frequent, longitudinal measurements of dynamical behavior. So now with these methods, they're forcing us to rethink how we can measure things, what we should be measuring, and how frequent we should be measuring these things. But of course, that's one thing, but to actually analyze it, we now need to have a new dynamical type of psychometrics and completely different norms than we currently have. So an enormous amount of work remains to be done, probably even before getting to those critical questions that you just raised.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting. Yeah.
And Christine, do you have a final question or comment?
Yeah, I do. I was wondering about the neurocorrelates of your of the findings you got with language, like in the language changes. So yeah, I know you studied also like genetics, and how can you combine this with the language data for the clinic?
Well, gosh, that's a really big question. I don't have the answer for that. I think that is definitely an area that is very, very exciting, and a lot needs to be established before really being clear about what those answers are. Maybe one of the things that's a little bit worrying to me at the moment is we don't really know, to answer your question, we don't really know how language agnostic these measures are. So given that nearly half the world is bilingual, how actually are we supposed to even be examining their cognition, either, you know, with classic neuropsychological tests, with these new measures, or even in vivo, as you've raised? You know, are we supposed to be looking at the first language or the second language? Because we know that certainly in clinical disorders that the different first or second language can be differentially affected. So I don't even know if we're ready to get to that question, being very conservative at answering that.
Thank you.
Wonderful questions, and this was a wonderful answer, I have to say. At this point, as I said, we are looking forward to participate and interact more with Professor Elvevåg during the symposium in April. I want to congratulate again Dr. Hoke and Dr. Schifani, our fantastic travel awardees, a prestigious award. And we really want to thank Professor Elvevåg to taking the time to talking to us and to talking to our travel awardees. So thank you, everybody. See you in April at SEARS, and bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Thank
Looking
you.
forward to it.